Why is there a homeless black girl sitting at my florist on a Saturday morning? Move her! Or somebody call somebody!
Beverly Sutton said it loud enough that 2 stalls heard. The girl was 12. Navy puffer 2 sizes too big. Her mother had written her name inside the collar before she died, 18 months ago. She closed her mother's book, stood up.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll go.
And how does a girl like you afford a $400 prescription? Show me.
Brielle Lawson held out her last EpiPen.
October 27th, 11 days. The clinic gave it to me. It's my last one.
Beverly's friends laughed. Then, 3 stalls over, someone said, "Oh." And a coffee cup hit the concrete. A man in a wool overcoat dropped to one knee. His lips were going blue. Brielle didn't ask permission to move. Brielle gave him the most precious thing she had without hesitation. After that, her life changed completely. She walked past Beverly Sutton before the laugh had finished, past the bouquets, past the friends in their burgundy scarves. The pavilion lights stayed on the same brightness, but something inside the pavilion had changed shape. The man at stall 14 was on both knees now. His name was Theodore Ashford, 68. He owned a biotech company a half-mile from the pavilion. His condo was on the 9th floor of a building he had bought for his wife many years ago, and his wife had been dead for 4 of those years. Her name was Eleanor. He still slept on the side of the bed she had once read on. He had a Saturday ritual. He walked the lakeside farmers market alone. Bradley Sanders, his head of security, followed at 30 meters. Today, Sanders was at the coffee vendor's tent. He had not been looking. In Theodore's jacket pocket that morning, there was a folded slip of paper. The handwriting on it belonged to Margaret Hollis, his chief of staff. It read in blue ink, Brielle Lawson, Maple Street Mission. He had carried that name in his pocket for 9 weeks. He had not called the number. At 8:32, he had stopped at Helena Davenport's stall and bought an apricot tart. Helena had said, "First batch, just out." Her rolling pin smelled very faintly of cashew. He had not caught it. He had taken 3 bites before he stopped chewing. The 4th bite was the one that did it. He paused mid-chew because something in the back of his throat had started to feel like a wool sock. He did not panic. He had eaten cashew decades ago, exactly once, on a flight back from a conference in Atlanta. He had been 31. He had walked himself to the lavatory and waited there until the cabin crew could find their kit. He had been lucky. He was not lucky this time. His personal EpiPen was in the foyer drawer of his condo, 6 blocks east. The slip of paper in his jacket pocket, Brielle Lawson, Maple Street Mission, was the only piece of paper that mattered, and he did not yet know it. By 8:41, the 4 signs had begun to arrive on his face in order. By 8:42, his knees had hit the concrete. The girl walking toward him was named Brielle Lawson. She was 12. She had woken at 6:15 that morning in the family wing of Maple Street Mission. Her bunk was number 18, lower berth. The upper berth had been empty for 8 months. Dottie Granger, the shelter's family advocate, had poured powdered milk and slid her a granola bar and checked her allergy plan on the fridge. The ritual. Dottie had asked, quiet, the way she always asked, "Your aunt visiting tomorrow?" Brielle had nodded. Pearl came every Sunday. Pearl was her mother's older sister, a hospital aide who lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 children and a husband who worked nights. Pearl had tried for 2 months to bring Brielle home. The math of the rooms had never worked. Her grandmother Heiress was in a memory care facility 90 miles north. The court had named Heiress her legal guardian after her mother died. Heiress no longer remembered Brielle's name on Tuesdays. The McKinney-Vento coordinator at Linden Middle School had placed Brielle at Maple Street under Dottie's educational proxy 8 months ago. The arrangement had a paper trail. It had a casework number. It did not have a bedroom door. That morning, Brielle had walked the 4 blocks to the pavilion. She had a flip phone with one number programmed in it. The number was Dottie's. In her tote, she carried her mother's Tarascon pharmacopoeia, edges held with athletic tape, bookmarked with a strip of receipt at page 211. The title of the page was Anaphylaxis, Recognition and Field Management. She had read that page every Sunday morning for 18 months. Sometimes she read it on Wednesdays, too. Her own pen had been in her inside chest pocket. The last one. The clinic had given it to her at her last intake, and the clinic had told her they couldn't refill until she had a stable address. She had not corrected them. She had eaten very carefully for the past 11 days, and she had planned to eat very carefully for the next 11. The pen was in her hand now. Behind her, Beverly Sutton stood with her bouquet drooping. She did not follow. She did not film. She just held her flowers at the level of her sternum and waited to see what would happen, because she did not know what else to do with her hands. By 8:42 and 3 seconds, Brielle reached the planter where stall 14 ended and the open aisle began. She had been studying for this since she was 6. He had been 40 seconds away for nearly 1 minute. 48 people were inside the pavilion. 12 of them already had their phones up. 2 of them, the college students who had filmed Beverly Sutton sneering at a child, had quietly pivoted to film the new thing without filming the old thing. None of them had called 911. A child saw before any of the adults did. His name was Owen Whitfield, 4 years old, holding his mother's hand at the produce stall across the aisle. He pointed at Theodore Ashford and said, "Mommy, that man's face is red." His mother said, "Don't stare, honey." That was the first warning the pavilion received. Nobody acted on it. Brielle did not run. Running was not what her mother had taught her. Running scattered judgment. She walked, fast but not panicked, the way you walk into a room you have been into many times before. She had not been into this room, but she had read the description of it on page 211, twice this Sunday and once on Wednesday, and the room matched. Lip cyanosis. The lips were blue. Tongue line swelling. The corner of his mouth was puffed. Urticaria above the collar. A red welt was climbing under his ear. Stridor on inhale. He was making a noise like a kettle, and the kettle was getting quieter. 4 signs in 2 seconds. She did not say the words out loud. She did not need to. She had been quizzed on this at her mother's kitchen table when she was 6 years old, on a poster lettered in red marker and taped to the refrigerator. Lips, tongue, hives, wheeze. Her mother had been a pediatric ER nurse at St. Eleanor's Medical Center. Her mother had said at the kitchen table, "This is not a test you can fail. This is a test you can be ready for." Her mother had also said, sitting in the same chair on the same day, "An EpiPen is an obligation, not a possession." The girl had been 7 the next time she heard the line. She had been carrying her own pen by then. She had been 9 when she used it on herself in a school cafeteria on a Tuesday in February after a peanut butter cracker reached her tray. She remembered her mother's voice walking her through it from memory. She had not used it on anyone else since. She was about to. She knelt at his right side. From the planter, 20 feet away, Beverly Sutton took 1 step forward. Then she stopped. She did not know what 1 step toward this was supposed to look like, and she did not have the vocabulary for the 2nd step, so she did not take it. A man in a green windbreaker said, "Somebody call somebody," and did not himself call anybody. Bradley Sanders, head of security, finally looked up from the coffee vendor's tent. He set his cup down. He had to set it down because the cup was hot and his hand was suddenly slow. He started to move. He was 30 meters away. Brielle was 3 inches away. She looked at Theodore Ashford's face. The man was conscious. His eyes were tracking. He looked at her the way drowning people look at the people closest to them, with permission already given. She did not waste the permission on a speech. She said, "Sir, do you have a known allergy?" He nodded once. She said, "Do you carry epinephrine?" He shook his head once. She did not ask whether he wanted hers. There was no time for the question, and there was no time for the wrong answer. She unzipped her chest pocket. Her hand was steady. Her face was the same face it had been when Beverly Sutton was asking how she had afforded a $400 prescription in her coat. Calm, attentive, looking at the person in front of her. She set the auto-injector across her open palm so that the people around her could see it. She said, loud enough that the phones would pick it up, "I am giving 0.3 milligrams of epinephrine, lateral thigh. Someone please call 911 and put it on speaker." 3 stalls over, a cheesemonger named Wesley Holloway dialed and held his phone out toward her. Riel was 46 minutes younger than her mother had been when her mother had identified a misfiled allergy chart at this same hospital in 1998. Riel did not know that yet. She pulled off the orange safety cap, and then she began. She placed the auto-injector at the mid-lateral thigh through his slacks. She was 12 years old. He was 6'1". She used both hands and the weight of her shoulder, the way her mother had once shown her with a flat marker on her own leg at age 7 in a kitchen lit by morning sun. She pressed firmly. She counted aloud. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Beverly Sutton, 20 feet away, watched a child kneel on the concrete in a too big puffer and do what no one else in the pavilion was doing. The flowers in her hand began slowly to tip toward the floor. She did not realize this until later, when she found them on her kitchen counter, wilted from the ride home. 3 Mississippi. 4 Mississippi. The college students who had been filming Beverly now filmed only Brielle. They had stopped editing in their heads. 5 Mississippi. 6 Mississippi. The dispatcher's voice on Wesley Holloway's phone said, "What's your location? What's happening? Who am I speaking to?" The girl, without looking up, said, "Lakeside Farmers Market, stall 14, male, approximately late 60s, anaphylaxis following ingestion of an apricot tart, suspected cross-contact with tree nut. I am administering 0.3 milligrams of epinephrine intramuscular lateral mid-thigh now. I am 12. The dispatcher paused on the line. The pause was not procedural. It was the pause of someone who had answered 15 years of these calls and had never heard a child read off a textbook handoff at the same speed as the textbook. The dispatcher said, "Honey, how old are you again?" "I'm 12. Please send the unit." The dispatcher said, 8 blocks out, 4 minutes. Stay on the line. 7 Mississippi. 8 Mississippi. The voice on the line introduced itself. Calvin Brooks, lead medic, riding in. Brielle said, "Mr. Brooks, his pulse is 132 and the breathing has been wheezy but constant. He nodded to me when I asked about allergy. He shook his head when I asked about epinephrine. He has had 1 dose. I will keep him supine with legs elevated." Calvin Brooks said, "Copy. Stay with him." 9 Mississippi. 10 Mississippi. She did not hear what was happening in the rest of the pavilion. The pavilion had gone narrow. The pavilion was a small concrete circle in which a man's chest still rose and fell. Theodore Ashford's right hand was open at his side. The fingernails had been blue at the cuticle. They were less blue now. The change was the size of a thought, but the change was real. The girl saw it before the medic did. The medic was still 3 blocks out. The dispatcher's voice on the line said, "You're doing it right. Don't move him yet." The girl did not respond. She had not stopped doing it right. She withdrew the injector. She did not throw it. She set it down beside her knee in the position her mother had taught her, needle pointing away from human bodies, cap nearby. She massaged the injection site for 10 seconds. She counted those out loud too. She slid her tote under Theodore Ashford's calves to elevate them 6 inches. She tilted his head slightly back, 2 fingers under the jaw to keep the airway open. She turned to a woman standing closest who looked the least frozen, a vendor in a green apron, and said, "His coat is restricting his neck. Please open the top button." The woman in the apron opened the button. Her hands were shaking. The coat smelled of expensive wool and very faintly of apricot. Brielle leaned close enough to be heard. She said, "Sir, your heart is going to feel like a hummingbird for a few minutes. That is the epinephrine doing what it is supposed to do. Your throat will start to open. Your lips will come back to color. I am not leaving. The ambulance is 4 minutes. We are going to be all right." Theodore Ashford's eyes moved to her face. He could not yet speak. He moved one hand 3 inches across the concrete and let it rest on top of hers. Brielle did not move her hand. Bradley Sanders arrived from the coffee tent. He was breathing hard. He saw a black girl on top of his principal, and he was not, in his head, in the moment yet. He was in his policy training from 8 years ago, and he reached for her shoulder. Brielle, without breaking eye contact with Theodore Ashford, said, "Take your hand off me. I am keeping him alive. Sit on his left side and check his pulse against your watch. Tell me when it crosses 120. Bradley Sanders, 54 years old, 22 years on the job, looked at this 12-year-old in a navy puffer 2 sizes too big, and the part of him that knew his policy was wrong arrived a second later than the part of him that knew she was right. He sat on Theodore Ashford's left side. He pressed 2 fingers to the inside of the man's wrist. He watched his own watch. After a moment, he said, 128. After another moment, he said, 124. A child near the produce stall, Owen Whitfield, 4 years old, said, "Mommy, is the man okay?" His mother said, "Honey, the girl is helping." Owen said, "The girl," and pointed. Brielle did not look up. She said, to the man on the concrete, "My name is Brielle Lawson. I am 12. My mother was a nurse at St. Eleanor's. You're doing the part of this that I can't help with. You're staying with me. Stay with me." Calvin Brooks's unit pulled into the alley behind stall 14 at 8:46 and 22 seconds. From the moment the orange cap had come off, 4 minutes and 14 seconds had passed. The cheesemonger, Wesley Holloway, lowered his phone. He had not stopped recording for the dispatcher. Theodore Ashford's lips were no longer blue. Brielle Lawson kept her hand under his hand, and she did not ask his name. She asked his pulse. While she counted, the world filled in what it had not yet known about her. She was 12. She had been 6 the first time her mother had taped a poster to their refrigerator. The poster had been lettered in red marker because the red marker was what was in the drawer that day. The poster had said, lips, tongue, hives, wheeze. In smaller print beneath it said, thigh, 10 seconds, breathe. Her mother had quizzed her on it at the kitchen table. Her mother had said, "This is not a test you can fail. This is a test you can be ready for." She had been 7 the first time she carried her own pen. The pen had been in a small pouch with a Velcro flap clipped to the inside of her backpack. Her mother had said, "An EpiPen is an obligation, not a possession. You don't show it off. You don't hide it. You don't lose it." She had been 9 the first time she used the pen on herself. The cafeteria at her elementary school had served peanut butter crackers on a Tuesday in February. A boy at the next table had been kind and had offered her one. She had not seen the box. She had taken a bite. Her tongue had filled her mouth in 11 seconds. She had unzipped the Velcro flap with shaking hands. She had said in her mother's voice, "Thigh, 10 seconds, breathe," and she had done it. She had been 10 when her mother was diagnosed. She had been 11 when her mother died. 42 years old, breast cancer. Stage at diagnosis, too late. She had been 11 and a half when her grandmother Heiress took her in for 3 weeks. Heiress had been 72 and beginning, on certain Tuesdays, to ask Brielle who she was. By the end of those 3 weeks, Heiress had not been able to answer her own front door. She had been 11 and 10 months when Aunt Pearl tried for 2 months to find a way to move her into a one-bedroom apartment that already held 4 people. Pearl had cried at the kitchen sink for 2 weeks before she said, "Baby, I can't." She had been 12 and 1 month when the McKinney-Vento coordinator at Linden Middle School signed her into the family wing of Maple Street Mission with Dottie Granger as her educational proxy. The bunk had been number 18. The upper berth had been empty. Her first night at the shelter, she had not slept. She had sat up in bunk 18 with her mother's book open on her lap, page 211, and she had read it 3 times in a row. By the 3rd reading, she had been able to recite the 4 signs without looking. By the 3rd reading, she had also stopped crying because crying was something her mother had not taught her to do quietly, and the family wing slept 28 people in one room. She had learned to cry quietly in the 2nd week. By the 3rd month, she had learned to read the page without crying at all. By the 6th month, the page had become a steady thing. By the 8th, it was almost a routine. For 18 months since her mother's death, she had read page 211 of the Tarascone Pharmacopoeia every Sunday morning before breakfast. She had read it the way some people read scripture, and some people read poetry, and some people read the obituaries, to keep something alive that the room around them kept trying to forget. She had never used the pen on someone who wasn't herself. She was using it now. She counted Theodore Ashford's pulse the way she had once counted her mother's. 132, 124, 116, 110. Her mother had been teaching her for this morning since she was 6. Calvin Brooks's unit arrived at 8:46 and 22 seconds. He kneeled opposite her on the concrete. He looked at her allergy bracelet. He looked at her face. He looked at her hand, which was still under Theodore Ashford's hand. He said, "Walk me through it." She walked him through it in 23 seconds. Male, approximately 68. Anaphylactic reaction following ingestion of an apricot tart, suspected cross-contact with tree nut. 0.3 milligrams of epinephrine intramuscular lateral mid-thigh administered at 8:42. Pulse on initial assessment 132, currently 110 and steady, lips returning to color. Heart rate decline appropriate for time elapsed. No second dose given. Mine was my only pen. Calvin Brooks looked at Bradley Sanders. He said quietly, "She did this clean. He'd have arrested in another 40 seconds. Bradley Sanders did not say anything. He was 22 years on the job. He had no language for what he had just been corrected by. They loaded Theodore Ashford onto the gurney. He was conscious now. He could speak. He caught Brielle's wrist before they lifted him, and he said, in a voice that worked at half power, "Stay. Please." Calvin Brooks looked at the girl and said, "Is there an adult we should call for you? A parent or a guardian?" Brielle gave him Dottie Granger's number at the shelter. The black Cadillac Escalade pulled into the ambulance bay at St. Eleanor's Medical Center at 9:01 in the morning. The pediatric wing carried Eleanor Ashford's name above the entrance in raised silver letters, and the woman who stepped out of the SUV had been the person who arranged for Eleanor's name to go up there 15 years ago. Her name was Margaret Hollis. She was Theodore Ashford's chief of staff. She was carrying a briefcase and a manila envelope, and she had been carrying that envelope in one form or another for 9 months. She found her principal first. He was upright on a gurney in the ER bay. He was hoarse. He was alive. He told her in 3 words, "The girl. Find her." Margaret Hollis found her 2 curtains down, sitting on a plastic chair with a cup of water she had not drunk. A clerk had just asked Brielle for her name. Brielle had said, "Brielle Lawson." Margaret Hollis stopped in the corridor. She had not stopped that way in 9 months. She stepped out of the bay. She made a phone call to a number she had dialed several times over those 9 months without anyone answering. She came back and stood at the edge of the curtain. She said, "I would like to sit with you for a few minutes. I have something that belongs to you." Dottie Granger arrived at 9:18 by city bus. She did not hug Brielle until Brielle reached for her first. Then she held her for 10 seconds without speaking, and then she let go. Margaret Hollis said to Dottie, "I would like you to be present while Ms. Lawson reads what's in this folder. These documents belong to her. She should not read them alone." Dottie sat down on Brielle's other side. Margaret Hollis opened the envelope. There were 5 documents. The first was a photograph. A young woman in scrubs, 28 years old, standing in the pediatric wing of St. Eleanor's, smiling in a way that suggested she was about to start a shift she had been looking forward to. The date stamp on the back read 1998. Below the date, in fountain pen ink that had once been new, someone had written Adeline L. for thinking it through. Brielle put her thumb on the back of the photograph where her mother's name had been written. She did not move her thumb for a long time. The second document was a grant charter, the Eleanor Ashford Frontline Children Fund, established in 2002. Mission: to establish individual trust accounts in the names of children of pediatric ER nurses, vesting at age 18 for use toward medical school tuition. The third document was a handwritten letter. The date was August. The year was the summer before Brielle's mother had been diagnosed. The handwriting was the same handwriting that had written Brielle inside the collar of a Navy puffer 18 months ago. The letter ran 1.5 pages. It nominated Brielle for the fund by name. It described, in 5 sentences a nurse would write, her daughter's allergy, and her daughter's calm, and her daughter's habit of memorizing things she might one day need. The letter ended, "If anything happens to me, this is what I want her to know. She was never on her own." Brielle read the letter once, then she read it again, then she read it a third time. She did not cry. She set it back on the table with the same care with which she had set down the injector. She set the letter down. Then she picked it back up. She read it a 4th time. She said to Dottie, "Can I read part of it aloud?" Dottie said, "All of it, baby. As many times as you need." Brielle read aloud the line she had read 3 times silently. She read it the way her mother had read recipes, one word, then the next. "If anything happens to me, this is what I want her to know. She was never on her own." Dottie did not look away from her face. Margaret Hollis did not move her hands. Brielle set the letter down a 2nd time. The 4th document was a search file, dated 9 months ago, Margaret Hollis's signature at the bottom. The file documented a methodical attempt to locate one Brielle Lawson, daughter of Adeline. Last known apartment, vacated. Phone number, disconnected. Grandmother, designated guardian on paper, in memory care, unable to relay. Maternal aunt, name initially unlisted. School records, McKinney-Vento flag, contact through educational proxy. Status, minor. Search ongoing. The 5th document was a photocopy of a hospital memo dated 1998. The memo described a near miss, a misfiled pediatric allergy chart that had nearly killed a 4-year-old boy admitted with abdominal pain. The nurse who had caught it, after rechecking the chart against the morning admissions log, was 26 years old at the time. Her name was Adeline Lawson. The boy on the chart, named on the 2nd page of the memo, was Eleanor Ashford's nephew. Brielle looked up. She looked at Dottie. She looked at Margaret Hollis. Then she looked at the curtain that separated her from the man whose hand she had been holding an hour earlier. She said very quietly, "She was looking out for me the whole time." Dottie's eyes were wet. She said, "Yes, she was." Margaret Hollis said, "Your mother nominated you for the fund 2 years before she was diagnosed. The trust was approved. It has been earning quietly for 2 years. It vests at 18. It will cover tuition for whatever medical school admits you." She paused and added, "It has had your name on it for 2 years, Ms. Lawson. We did not invent this for you this morning. We only finally found you this morning." Theodore Ashford was wheeled to her bay 10 minutes later. He could speak again, in a voice that worked at 3/4 power. He looked at her and he said, "I have been trying to find you for 9 months. I almost died before I did it. I am not going to waste a second more." Brielle did not answer immediately. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the letter. She looked at the man in the bed. Then she said in her own voice, "My mother had been looking out for me the whole time. So had your wife." Theodore Ashford did not have an answer. He nodded. That was the answer. Behind the curtain, Margaret Hollis was already on her phone, beginning the work of the next 4 days. Brielle had walked into the hospital with 1 EpiPen and a Terrascone held together with athletic tape. She walked out of the bay 2 hours later with a folder that named her by name and with the first hint of a future her mother had hidden inside a fund and a letter and a kitchen table lesson 7 years old. Her mother had fought for her 2 summers and never said a word. A 19-second clip surfaced online by the following morning. Homeless kid on top of biotech CEO at the market. The comments were ugly. Some people were kind. The kind ones were quieter than the cruel ones, the way they usually are. The clip had been spliced from 3 different phones. One of the phones, the college student's, had captured Beverly Sutton's voice in the seconds before the rescue began. How does a homeless kid have a $400 prescription in her coat? The voice was unidentified. Beverly's face had been turned away from the lens. She did not contact the platform to ask that the audio be removed, and she did not contact anyone to apologize. She simply did not return to the market on Saturdays. The flower stall noticed. Carol Anderson did not. Bradley Sanders, suspended pending review, told a reporter at the alley behind the office that there were questions about the encounter. A blog post insinuated that the girl had been near Theodore Ashford by design and that the EpiPen had been planted to manufacture a viral moment. Dottie Granger saw the clip first on the shelter's shared laptop. She closed it before Brielle came back from her bunk. Margaret Hollis called the shelter at 6:14 that evening. She spoke with Dottie first. She did not ask for control. She asked for permission. She said, "I would like to publish a statement under Ms. Lawson's name. Nothing will go out without her okay." Brielle came on the line. Dottie sat at the table beside her with a notepad and a pen. Brielle dictated the wording. The foundation published a 1-paragraph statement at 7:11 that evening. It quoted Brielle's exact 911 handoff with no embellishment, and it said, "Ms. Lawson administered her own emergency device to save a stranger's life. The foundation supports her, as her mother nominated her to be supported 2 years prior to her mother's passing. Speculation otherwise will not be entertained." Bradley Sanders' suspension was finalized at 7:30. Aunt Pearl drove over from the hospital where she had just clocked out of a double shift. She found Brielle on the family wing common room couch, sitting beside Dottie, holding the manila envelope on her lap. Pearl sat down on Brielle's other side. She did not say anything. She put her arm around her niece and she held her for 45 minutes. They did not speak. They did not need to. Margaret Hollis arrived at the shelter at 8:22 with a small white box and a manila envelope of her own. The box held 2 new auto-injectors, sealed, expiration 24 months out. Brielle read the seals twice before she took one out of the box and slid it into her chest pocket. The second envelope held a typed offer letter. "The foundation would like to publicly correct the framing of the morning's events," the letter said. They would like the public record to identify Adeline Lawson, RN, as the original applicant nominator on Brielle's trust, not as a posthumous beneficiary of a charity granted by the Ashford family. The foundation was requesting Brielle's permission to make this correction in writing on the fund's website. on the same page on which Brielle's nomination appeared. Brielle read the letter once. She said, "To Margaret Hollis, my mother nominated me. Print it that way, don't soften it. Don't make it sound like a gift. She earned the right to nominate me. She did it before anyone knew she was sick. The wording matters." Margaret Hollis nodded once. She made one phone call from the common room couch. The foundation's website was updated within the hour. Aunt Pearl stayed at the shelter past visiting hours. Dottie did not enforce the curfew. Pearl walked Brielle back to bunk 18 at 9:50. She tucked the navy puffer over the foot of the bunk the way she had once tucked her own children in, before her sister had died, before the math of the rooms had become impossible. She kissed Brielle's forehead. She said, "Baby, I am working on getting you home. I am working on it." Brielle said, "I know." Pearl drove the long way back across the city so that she could cry without her own children seeing her. That evening, somewhere in the same city, Beverly Sutton put a vase of wilted dahlias on her counter and did not put the kettle on. She did not know how to apologize, so she did not. The internet did not require her apology. The internet had not yet noticed she was the voice. Beverly's youngest daughter, 24, lived 2 states away. She called her mother the next morning at 7:30. She said, "Mom, was that you? In the clip? Was that your voice?" Beverly did not answer the question. Her daughter said, "Mom, was that you?" Beverly said very quietly, "I don't know what to do with what I did." Her daughter said, "Start by sending her something. Not money, not a card, something useful. And don't put your name on it." Beverly hung up. She did not eat breakfast that morning. She sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours with a notepad and tried to decide what useful meant. Brielle had survived 8 months of the shelter. She was not going to survive an uncorrected hashtag. 4 days later, on a Wednesday at 10 in the morning, Brielle Lawson walked into the 12th floor conference room of Ashford Vesper Biotech with Dottie Granger at her shoulder. The Foundation's child protection protocol required an invited adult in attendance for any minor at a board meeting. Dottie sat at the back. Brielle sat at the table. Her chair was the second from the end on the left side. Her Tarascon pharmacopoeia was on her lap. There were 11 board members. Theodore Ashford was at the head. His voice was almost back to full strength. He had been told by his cardiologist that morning that he had been given a second life and that it was time he started spending it differently. He had nodded once and had not said any of the things he wanted to say. Agenda Item 3 was a pediatric EpiPen distribution pilot for Title I middle schools in the state's 3 largest urban districts. An outside consultant had presented a first-year cost projection of $4.6 million. The proposal had a glossy cover. The cover had a stock photo of a nurse on it. The nurse was smiling. Dr. Vivian Holbrook, the board's pediatric advisor, opened the discussion by pointing out that the training plan in the consultant's proposal was thin. She used the word thin twice. The numbers, she said, did not reflect retraining. The plan assumed 1 school nurse per building. The plan assumed centralized storage. She did not think the plan would work in a real cafeteria on a Tuesday in February. Gregory Ashbrook, no relation to Theodore, suggested they delay the pilot a year for more modeling. Theodore Ashford turned his head very slowly toward the girl at the second from end chair. He said, "Ms. Lawson, I am not going to ask you to write a proposal. I am going to ask you, from your own experience, what would have helped at your school." Brielle took a breath. She did not look at her Tarascon. She did not need to. Dottie's hand was on the back of her chair. She said, "My friend's name was Hazel Whitaker." The room got quiet. She said, "Last spring, in our cafeteria at Linden Middle School, Hazel went into anaphylaxis from a granola bar that wasn't supposed to have peanut. She was at our table. The teacher on lunch duty was a sub. The school nurse was in the gym running a posture screening for 6th grade. The EpiPens were in a locked cabinet in the nurse's office. The nurse's office is on the 2nd floor. Our cafeteria is on the 1st floor. She said 2 of my classmates ran. They had to find an adult with a key. The key was supposed to be with the nurse. The nurse had given it to the assistant principal that morning because the cabinet was sticking. The assistant principal had taken it to a phone call in the parking lot. It took 92 seconds to find the right key. She said Hazel lived. She was in the hospital for 3 days. She missed the geography unit on rivers. She said 92 seconds is the difference between a kid coming back to school on Monday and a kid never coming back. The pens were in the building. The key was in the wrong pocket. Silence for 8 seconds. The 8 seconds were the longest silence the conference room had held in years. Gregory Ashbrook's pen tapped twice against his notepad and then stopped. The consultant against the back wall counted his own breath, then his ceiling tiles, then stopped counting. Dr. Vivian Holbrook had been a pediatric ER physician for 31 years before she took the board seat. She had watched a child die from a delayed epinephrine dose in her own bay in 2010. She had not forgotten that child. Dr. Vivian Holbrook very quietly said, "Where would you have wanted the pens?" Brielle said, 3 teachers on every floor, trained, pens in their classroom drawer, not behind a locked door. The nurse can still be the nurse, but the teachers are who's there. Silence again, shorter this time. Dr. Holbrook opened the consultant's PDF on the screen in front of her. She scrolled down. She said, "The CDC's 2019 field review found that decentralized classroom storage cuts retrieval delay from an average of 52 seconds to under 9. Ms. Lawson's case took 92 because the storage was on a separate floor." Gregory Ashbrook said, "We would need to retrain 3 teachers on every floor. The per-school training cost doubles." Dr. Holbrook said, "Per the same review, the per-staff training cost in decentralized models is, on average, 1/3 of the consultant's number, because the modules are shorter and because the protocols are simpler." She looked at the consultant, who had been brought in to present and was now sitting against the back wall. She said, "Run the math." The consultant ran the math. The Foundation's junior analyst, a woman of 26 in a charcoal blazer named Diana Calloway, ran the math too, faster on her own laptop at the side of the room. 8 minutes later, she lifted her head. She said, "Restructured proposal lands at approximately $2.3 million for the first year. 3 named adults per floor across 4 floors in 80 Title I middle schools. The trainer pen and real pen pairing reduces the long-term per pen cost by 22%. Brielle had not spoken during the math. Theodore Ashford looked down the table. He said, "Motion to fund pilot at $2.3 million, structured per Ms. Lawson's testimony and Dr. Holbrook's restructure." Second. Dr. Holbrook said, "Second." The vote passed 11-0. Gregory Ashbrook had voted yes. He had not enjoyed voting yes, but he had voted yes, because he had a granddaughter at a Title I middle school in a neighboring state, and because the math had been run twice in front of him by women whose hands were steadier than his. After the meeting, Dr. Vivian Holbrook crossed the conference room. She did not walk over to Brielle. She walked over and then she knelt, not in a patronizing way, but the way a respectful adult kneels to put their eyes level with the eyes of a younger person who has just said something they did not yet have the right room for. She said, "Thank you, Ms. Lawson." She said, "Hazel would thank you too. We're going to get this to her school first." Brielle said, "Thank you, Dr. Holbrook." Then she said in the same calm voice she had used on the concrete 4 days earlier, "My mother would have wanted Hazel's school first too." Dr. Holbrook stood up. She nodded once. She walked to her seat and gathered her papers, and she did not stop nodding for the time it took her to gather them. Dottie Granger, at the back of the room, was crying quietly into a tissue she had pulled from her purse 20 minutes earlier. A child had walked into a boardroom with a duffel left at coat check and a paperback at the table. The institution had done the math. 3 months later, on a Saturday in mid-January, Brielle Lawson woke in her own bed. The bed was in a corner room on the 3rd floor of the 2-bedroom apartment on Wren Street. The room had a small window. The window faced east. The curtains had been picked by Aunt Pearl from a clearance bin at a department store because Pearl had refused to spend more than she needed to on something Brielle could change later if she wanted. The curtains were pale yellow. Brielle liked them. The apartment had been signed for by Aunt Pearl in late October. The Foundation's Family Stabilization Program had issued a housing supplement specifically to enable Brielle's placement with Pearl, a one-time grant that covered the deposit and 12 months of the rent difference between Pearl's old apartment and the new 2-bedroom. Pearl had signed the lease herself in her own name. The Foundation had not signed it. The Foundation had only paid the difference. Brielle had her own room. The bed was hers. The Eleanor Ashford Frontline Children Fund had not yet vested. It would vest in Brielle's name on her 18th birthday. The trust statement, mailed quarterly to the apartment, showed a balance growing at the modest rate of a well-managed endowment. Whatever medical school accepted Brielle Lawson, the trust would cover her tuition. The trust would not have paid for her bedroom. The Foundation had built a second program to pay for her bedroom, separately, because Brielle's bedroom was Brielle's, not the trust's. Brielle was back at Linden Middle School full-time. Honor roll, first quarter. She and Hazel Whitaker ate lunch at the same table every day. Hazel did not yet know that Brielle's testimony in late October had reshaped a pilot that would be installed in Linden Middle next month. Brielle had not been in a hurry to tell her. They were 12, and they had the geography unit on rivers to repeat together first because Brielle had missed that unit too, the spring her mother died. Brielle had been named the youngest member of the Foundation's Youth Advisory Board. 8 kids, ages 11 through 16. They reviewed training materials and told the team when the language was too clinical for kids to follow. They met one Saturday a month. They were not paid. They were 12 to 16. They were given pizza. Brielle had eaten the pepperoni at the first meeting and the cheese at the second because Pearl had told her, "Baby, you can switch." The pilot launched in 9 schools in the city. Linden Middle was one of them. 3 teachers per floor, pens in classroom drawers. Hazel Whitaker's 8th grade English teacher, Ms. Whitman, was first to recertify. Ms. Whitman had kept her trainer pen in the top drawer of her desk and had practiced the lateral thigh motion on a thigh dummy 19 times before she was satisfied. A small office at Ashford Vesper Biotech, 2 doors down from Theodore's, had a frame on the wall. Inside the frame was a photocopy of a hospital memo dated 1998, on the day a 26-year-old pediatric ER nurse named Adeline Lawson had caught a misfiled allergy chart that would have killed a 4-year-old boy. Below the frame, a small brass plate read, "Adeline Lawson, Nominator, Eleanor Ashford Frontline Children Fund." Beside that frame, in a smaller frame, was a crayon drawing on the back of a community pavilion flyer. "Thank you for helping the man with the red neck. Owen, age 4." The card had arrived in mid-November. The return address was stall 14. Brielle and Theodore Ashford ate lunch together every other Friday at a diner 2 blocks from the office. He ordered dry toast. She ordered the apricot tart from the bakery next door because she was not allergic to apricot, and because she had decided, sitting at Pearl's kitchen table one Sunday evening, that she was not going to spend the rest of her life being afraid of the morning that almost ended his. Aunt Pearl picked her up after each lunch. Pearl never came inside the diner. She nodded at Theodore Ashford through the window. Theodore nodded back. He had asked once if he could come around to her side and shake her hand. Pearl had said, "Not yet." He had nodded at that, too. Brielle's grandmother, Heiress, had been moved by a one-time geriatric stipend from the foundation to a memory care facility 11 blocks from Wren Street. Pearl visited her on Saturdays. Brielle visited her some Sundays. On those Sundays, Brielle read aloud from page 211 of her mother's Tarascon. The rhythm of the clinical language was something Heiress still recognized, even on the days she did not recognize Brielle's name. Heiress had nodded at the line "Recognition precedes treatment" twice that January. Brielle had counted both times. Bradley Sanders had been reassigned, with a step in pay and a substantial reduction in responsibility, to a corporate facility post in a different city. Susan Whitlock had taken the role of Theodore Ashford's lead. She was a former trauma nurse. She walked beside Theodore on Saturdays at the market, on the rare Saturdays he still went, and she watched him, not the perimeter. Sanders had sent Brielle a one-line letter of apology by certified mail in early December. "I am sorry I reached for your shoulder." Brielle had written back on a postcard, "Watch the principal." She had signed her name in full. On the first Sunday in February, Brielle visited her mother's grave for the first time since the move. The cemetery was on the south side of the city. Aunt Pearl drove. Pearl had not been to the grave since the funeral. Pearl had not been able to. The headstone was small. Pearl had paid for it herself in the months after her sister's death and had been able to afford only a small one. The stone read, "Adeline Lawson, R.N., 1980 to 2023. She caught what others missed. Brielle sat in the grass beside the stone for 38 minutes. She read aloud from her Tarascon the new addendum she had drafted herself for the Foundation's training module, the part about how to talk to a person going into anaphylaxis. She read it the way her mother had taught her to read instructions, one sentence at a time. When she was done, she put her hand on the stone. She said, "I did it right, Mama." They listened. Pearl, 20 feet away, looked the other way to give her niece privacy. The wind moved through the cypress at the edge of the cemetery. Brielle stood up. In the second week of February, a package arrived at Aunt Pearl's apartment on Wren Street. No return address. Inside was a single, hardcover textbook, Tintinalli's Emergency Medicine, 9th edition, and a small, folded note. The note said, "For the desk. From someone who was wrong on a Saturday morning and is trying to be less wrong on a Tuesday." Brielle put the book beside her mother's Tarascon. The two books did not match in size. They matched in something else. Pearl did not ask where it had come from. Brielle did not say. They both understood that some kinds of apologies do not need a name attached, and some kinds should not have one. The Tarascon pharmacopoeia sat on Brielle's desk in her new room, edges still held with athletic tape. Page 211 was still the most read page. Brielle was 12. Her mother had been 28 in the photograph. She was not in a hurry. An EpiPen is an obligation, not a possession. Adeline Lawson had set it at a kitchen table in red marker on a refrigerator poster the year her daughter was 6. She had set it again at age 7 when her daughter began to carry her own pen. She had set it for the last time by writing it inside the cover of a book held together by athletic tape, the August before she died. Brielle Lawson set it back to herself on a Saturday in mid-January, taping a new poster. Same words, same red marker, same hand-lettered 4-line column, to the refrigerator of an apartment on Wren Street that had not yet learned the smell of her mother's cooking, because her mother had never lived there, and never would. Next year, the pilot would expand to Title I high schools. Brielle had been asked back to the Youth Advisory Board for a second year. She had said yes. That was all she had been promised. The orange cap from the pen she had used at stall 14, the cap she had set down on the concrete on the morning of October 16th beside her knee, needle pointing away from human bodies, was in a small glass jar on her desk beside her mother's book. She had not made the jar a shrine. She had only made it a fact. Lips, tongue, hives, wheeze. She kept reading the page. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that competence can come from anywhere and that no one is too young to save a life, a quiet subscribe and a kind word in the comments help us keep telling stories like this one. That's all. Thank you for listening.
You know, I have been telling stories on the channel for a while now, but this one stayed with me longer than most. I kept thinking about that orange cat, sitting in a jar on a 12-year-old's lap. Here's what I keep coming back to. A woman tried to make Riel smaller that morning. Smaller because she was black. Smaller because she was poor. Smaller because she was tall and alone at market on a Saturday. And 3 minutes later, that same girl was the only person in the building who knew how to keep a man alive. Competence doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for somebody to think you're worth saving. It just shows up, usually in the people we have spent the most energy underestimating. And I think about her mother, Adelaide. 2 years before she got sick, she sat down and wrote a letter for a daughter she didn't know she was going to leave behind. If you have ever loved somebody and worry you weren't doing enough, you probably did more than they will ever know. The people who love us are working on our behalf in rooms we don't see. Sometimes we only find out after they're gone. If this story moved you, do me one favor, don't share it. Tell somebody you love that you see them today out loud. I will see you in the next one.